Well, if you have your Bibles, let's turn together in the New Testament, the book of Acts, chapter 20. As you turn in there, I wonder how many of you are ready for Christmas. We are already only 2 weeks away from that Christmas time. And it's funny to me how expectations begin to change at this time of year. How we have such hope and anticipation that this might be the best Christmas ever. And that this is going to be one maybe like old times or like we remember from the past, or maybe we just want a Christmas where everybody gets along, I don't know, or where the food is perfect or the gifts are exactly right or what have you. And so for that reason, we're going to start for the next 2 or 3 weeks just looking at a new sermon series entitled Christmas as It Could Be. And I'm not going to tell you how to set the perfect table or buy the right gifts or wrap them up nicely or anything like that. I can't do that anyway, so there's no point in me wasting time talking about that. But we are going to look at several things that I believe would help us accomplish that goal. And one of the biggest needs, I believe, is for us to escape from this materialistic version of Christmas. Kind of this modern approach to Christmas where it's all about stuff. It's about shopping. It's about gadgets. It's about who gets what. The reality is, even if maybe you're not spending as much time at the mall as you have in years past, you're probably spending an equal amount of time online buying things and having them shipped. The reality is materialism in our world is still alive and well. It's thriving. It hasn't gone anywhere. We know that from the news reports. Seemingly every day on the news, there's somebody stationed at a mall somewhere reporting on the crowds, or they're reporting from FedEx talking about all the packages that are being shipped or what have you. And so we see evidence of it all around us. And the key, I believe, to escaping materialism and making this Christmas special, making it what it could be, is not to simply spend less. Because you can spend just a tiny amount of money and still be materialistic in our thinking and our approach. So it's not about how much or how little we spend, but rather it's the product of a radical change in how we define and use wealth, and how we look at it, and how it and what effect it has on our lives. And I believe it's demonstrated through a life that is spent focused on other priorities and other matters to the point where money becomes a tool rather than the goal of our lives. And that's a major shift in thinking from our world. And in Acts chapter 20, the Apostle Paul proved that, or demonstrated that, in his life and his ministry in speaking with these believers. He is in Ephesus, preparing to leave from there, a place where he had spent a great amount of time. In fact, probably as much as any other place that Paul went, he spent time in Ephesus. And now he's preparing to leave them to continue on to the various places that God might lead him. And he is giving kind of a farewell speech, if you will, or last words of goodbye. And he's speaking about a life and a ministry that really exemplifies for us what non-materialistic living looks like. So in Acts chapter 20, I want us to focus in on 3 verses in particular, and then talk about how we can escape the idea of modern materialism today. Acts chapter 20, verse 33, this is Paul speaking, and he says to them, "I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes. You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my own needs and to the men who are with me. In everything, I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" These are pretty remarkable words. And imagine how different Christmas could be. Imagine how different your life could be. Your day-to-day existence could be if we lived like what Paul's describing here. if suddenly we went through a radical transformation in our thinking to where it's not about stuff. It's not about dollar signs or the accumulation of wealth or things of that nature. And so to help us get there, I really want to break down this passage and talk about what it means to us personally and what principles that we can look at to escape this materialistic worldview. The first one I want you to see, going back to verse 33, is that I have to establish core values about wealth. I've got to settle those, and those are things that God does in me, principles that He teaches me, values that He impresses on me, because everything we do with money comes from the values that we hold about it. If you or somebody that you know is one of those crazy spenders, they just go out and they see things and they got to have it and they just buy and buy and buy and buy. It's because the value that we have about money and wealth is what it can accumulate for us or how it makes us feel to have it. But if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're not a spender, you're that saver. You're that Scrooge type. I don't want to part with any of it. I'm going to hold on to all of it. And you just like to pile it up around the house so you can look at it or whatever you do with it. Or maybe you just love to bask in the glow of your investment portfolio statement every month or whatever it is. The same thing is true. We're still... we like the value of money and wealth as power, as giving us a sense of security or standing in this world. Or if you're the person that likes every new and latest gadget that's out there, if you wait in line to buy a new iPhone or something like that, if that's kind of your approach to things, then maybe our value is that we like the status attached or the image that it presents to the world to have the latest and the greatest things. The bottom line is, if we're not intentional about setting sound values, the world is going to fill that void. Because we are relentlessly bombarded with advertisements or with the people in our lives that become walking billboards. Have you ever stopped to think about that? Through the brands that we wear or we drive or we eat, we are walking billboards. That is designed by this world to continue a materialistic approach to life. And so it's always around us. There's never a moment where we can escape from that. And yet Paul said in that world, he said, I have coveted no one's silver or gold or clothes. In other words, I'm not giving in to the world's value system. You say, well, that was easy in Paul's day. I mean, he's in Ephesus. How bad could it be? Well, let me give you a little history lesson on Ephesus. Ephesus would be the equivalent of modern day New York City. It was a major metropolitan area, a very wealthy place. In fact, it was one of the few free cities in the Roman Empire. But they were loyal to Rome, so there were no soldiers there. There was no Roman influence over how they lived their lives. And they were just affluent and successful, and they just did their thing. It was a major center of trade in all the region. And so wealth was a part of their lives. And so for Paul to make this statement to them, I have not coveted your gold or your silver or your clothes or any of that stuff, he obviously saw it among the people. He saw that perhaps even many of them that were new in their faith came from that kind of background. And Paul wanted them to know, listen, my investment in your life has nothing to do with what you have to offer me. I am much more differently focused in my life than about all of that. And folks, that attitude, I believe, is in very short supply today. We've gotten to the place where the hot item, every Christmas we're told these are the hot items you got to have this year. The reason that's so is because everybody wants it. Everybody's clamoring for it. And it becomes the thing that everybody's looking for because we're sharing those common values and priorities. And Paul is reminding them that his value is about ministry. It is about the kingdom of God. And that's more important to him than any gain he might get. So let's talk about then some of the biblically established values that can help to change our view of wealth. What are the principles? What are the values that we can incorporate into our lives that begin to change how we view the stuff around us? Number one, absolutely fundamental to all of it, is to understand that God owns and distributes everything. When we come to offering time in a church, the people that struggle with it are the people that say, I don't know if I can part with my money. It's not our money, it's His. When we get overprotective about our homes and our cars and our possessions because we're worried that somebody might take it from us, when we need to know it's all His. We would not have it were it not for the blessing from His hand. He is the one who owns it all and distributes it. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it. 1 Chronicles 29:12, both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. In your hand is power and might, and it lies in your hand to make great and to strengthen everyone. God, this is simply about you and what you have chosen to do in each of our lives. And if we don't hold this value, it's essentially the equivalent to saying that we really don't need God. If I don't believe that God is my source, that God is the provider of all things, that it's ultimately all His, then what I'm saying is, God, I don't need you because I am my source. And so I really can push you aside when it comes into conflict with what I have to do to either earn, maintain, or multiply my wealth. That's why so many times we're willing to cast God aside for career. Or we're willing to cast God aside if it's going to cost me something. The value that we have to hold is, God, everything I have is yours, and it is your right to use it, to take it, to add to it as you see fit. Because here's the reality that the Bible teaches time and time again. We always honor the source of our wealth. We always honor most the source of our wealth. If you believe that the company you work for is the source of your wealth, then whatever they tell you to do ultimately is going to win out over what God tells you to do. If we believe the government is the source of wealth, then we're going to listen to that over what God says to do. But when we believe God is our source, then we will honor Him first. That's why Jesus said, in simple terms, you can't serve God and money. You know what it means to serve, by the way? I think sometimes we use that word and we've never really taken the time to understand it in the simplest terms. You know what it means to serve? It means to do the will of someone else. If you are serving money, you are doing the will of money. What money dictates that you do. But when we serve God, we live in obedience to Him. But you know this value is missing in our lives when we say in times of trouble, you know what, if I only had more money, we'd be able to get out of this. Or when you get stressed out and your answer is, I'm just going to go spend to make me feel better. Then we recognize there's a value problem. We need the core value of God's control over our finances. A second value that'll help change our view is to understand that we are accountable for our stewardship of what God has given to us. We're going to give an account for all of that. And regardless of the degree to which we have been blessed financially, we need to know that God has a plan for how we use it. Well, a great statement Paul made in 2 Corinthians 5 that we are all ultimately going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in the body according to what he's done, whether good or bad. That applies to our wealth. It's not just how did we think or what did we do with our time, but what did we do with our wealth, with our money. This value is what helps to keep us in check when it comes to spending. And listen to me. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. God is not anti-fun, okay? God has not said, I want to make sure that you give every penny to the church. And by the way, this is not a sermon on bigger offerings or anything like that, okay? So you can just rule that out right now. You can relax. I'm not going to hit you with that later or anything. This is simply about the values that we hold that seem to come oozing out this time of year. God simply is reminding us that we will answer for how we use those blessings. Listen, there's nothing wrong with buying clothes for your family. All right? You've got to provide for them. There's nothing wrong with taking a vacation that's going to strengthen your marriage and your family bonds and things of that nature. There's nothing wrong with expressing your love for a friend or a family member through a gift that you might give them. But when we compare doing it out of that goal with the excess that we so often see in our world, we realize how the values get skewed so easily. A third one is to understand that the pursuit of wealth isn't satisfying. It simply doesn't satisfy in the long term. And what you see through Paul's life and ministry is that he never sought satisfaction from what he could gain from other people over the course of his ministry. It was never about any of that. What was it he said in Philippians 4? We always like to quote that verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so often we pull it out and we use it for everything other than the context in which Paul spoke it, which was in the context of money. He said, you know what? I've been able to get along when I've been dirt poor, and I've been able to get along fine when God's blessed me with resources. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whether I'm rich, whether I'm poor, or anywhere in between, I understand that it is God who has given it and God who can take it away, and I'm going to keep serving Him and trusting Him. That's the principle we have to understand, because wealth doesn't satisfy. Money can do a lot of things, but we need to firmly establish this particular value and mindset that it can never satisfy our hearts. There will never be a moment when wealth satisfies the deep longings of your heart. And listen, the best example in all of Scripture comes from the wealthiest man in all of Scripture. Solomon himself, who had more than you or I will ever have, and more than all of us combined will ever have. Solomon had it. And yet in Ecclesiastes 2, he said, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I didn't withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, the labor which I exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Can you imagine the emptiness of sitting on, in today's dollars, multiple billions and billions of dollars? And just having to look at it and say, it really doesn't mean anything. Y'all remember Ross Perot that ran for president back in the 90s? Some of you do. Most of you, I hope, or else I'm getting really old. He said some crazy things and did some crazy things through the year, but he made a great statement one time that I'll never forget. He said, after you pay the bills, money is the most overrated thing in the world. And I think that's what Solomon is saying here in Ecclesiastes. After you pay the bills, what is it? What then? Buy more stuff that can wear out? Have more zeros on the bank account so you can show off to your friends and neighbors? Or, what's the point of all of it? Paul said we need to settle that value. Here's the thing I know. No one in their right mind has ever said, you know what, if I could just get that new iPhone, I could die happy. Doesn't work that way, does it? It sounds ridiculous. But the way we order our lives sometimes says that that's how we're really living. Because I would rather have that and the momentary happiness that may bring to my life over the settled value of being able to just trust God and establishing those values that give honor and glory to Him. But listen, once you settle that value, then you can begin to change your life. And so the second value and principle I want us to understand is that if we're going to escape materialism, we have to begin to work for a purpose, not for a profit. Our work should be for a purpose. It may surprise some of you to know that Paul was not a career minister the way we so often view them today. Look at verse 34. He said, "You yourselves know that these hands ministered to my own needs and to the men who were with me." You know what he's saying? Hey, we worked and provided for ourselves. In today's terminology, Paul was bivocational. He was a tent maker. And he worked. And he used what he got from that just to support his life while doing the ministry that God had called him to do. And he never lost sight of what was most important. His job was a calling that would enable his ministry, the real purpose that God had for his life. I wonder how many of us have adopted that value. And listen, if we can truly begin to live like this and make this core value a part of our lives, it'll change how you view Monday morning. If you're working for a profit, you're going to drag yourself out of bed, and it's going to be all you can do to get there and to put up with the traffic and the people and all of the responsibilities and a grumpy boss and difficult customers or patients or students or whatever environment you find yourself in. But when you work for a purpose, you see the people and the situations differently. And it gets us away from this concept of working for wealth. I think that the real serious problem today is that so many of us are working for the reward of a paycheck. As it's been said so succinctly by others, we do jobs we hate to buy stuff we don't need to impress people we don't like. You know, we are living the American dream when we work for the weekends and wait for our 2 weeks vacation. Is that why we do it? Just so I can sleep in on Saturday and go somewhere fun during the summer? Boy, not only will that warp your view of wealth, but it guarantees you'll never find fulfillment in your work. God expects us to work. That's a given. But He also wants us to use those earnings to meet our needs. But our work allows us to do more for the kingdom than we could without it. And if we see work as punishment or as simply something we do to make the money that we need in order to do the things that we really want to do, then it becomes a drudgery, a burden to our lives. I've got a great book that I would highly recommend to any of you by Alan Gotthard. It's called The Eternity Portfolio. And in it, he essentially says there are really only two places that you can invest your money: with your family or in eternity. That's it. And if we are following the Lord and we are trying to live a Christ-like life, we're going to do a measure of both. We have a responsibility to provide for our families. But we are also called to see beyond here and now. Just imagine how differently your work week would feel by just beginning to see it as the means for God to use you to change lives and glorify Him. If suddenly your work didn't have anything to do with your salary, but you began to see it as the people you're going to come in contact with. God has placed me here with the opportunity to pour into the lives of these people, to encourage, to disciple, to evangelize, to be there for them. Imagine the difference and how you would view what you have to do. We have to begin to see God's purpose in it. And that leads to the third guideline, and that is that the Bible challenges us to invest in others. In verse 35, notice what Paul says. In everything, I showed you that by working hard in this manner, you must help the weak. This word for help is unique. It means to take up for or to step in to meet those needs, to take up their cause, essentially. And Paul proved that in his life, and he challenged others to seek to invest in their lives as well. That's why the command, you must. Not just me. Because that's how we often view it, isn't it? Well, that's what those super Christians do. That's what those really mature, retired folks that have got all their money squared away and everything settled, that's what they do. No. That's what we as believers do. We must help those who are weak. And by the way, there are several ways that we can financially invest in helping others that are not just about giving to those who are poor. Our financial investment can help spiritually. A lot of folks are weak spiritually, not just physically. They're apart from Christ. They're struggling with their faith. When we do things like giving of our tithes, or we give through our love offering for Jesus into missions and all the things that we do there, it's an opportunity for that money to go toward helping people be built up in their spiritual lives. And we miss that blessing when our giving is obligatory or non-existent. What you give has eternal results. Folks, that's the part that we miss. What we invest in evangelizing, in discipling, in ministering to the spiritual needs around us shows up in eternity. I pray all the time, God, when I give, I pray that only eternity can measure the impact of it. Not because of how wonderful I am for giving it, but because of how great you are at using it. Because you can do far more with this than I could ever dream of doing. It helps spiritually. Secondly, it obviously helps physically. Every day we see tremendous physical suffering, and our financial resources can minister to others. But listen, it's not about just helping those that may be homeless or who may be struggling through a financial difficulty. Sometimes it might be we invest our money in putting gas in our car so that we can go see them and care for them, or through food that we buy for them, or something of that nature. Remember, Jesus had a healing ministry as well as a teaching one. And so there were physical needs that were met along the way. Our financial investment also helps to meet mental and emotional needs as well. You think about how much of our world is stressed out, burnt out, worn out, struggling in their marriages, on the verge of giving up. It could be that a great financial investment is, hey, let me take you to lunch and just listen and be there for you and let you know that I care about what's going on in your life and you're not in this by yourself. Because let's speak about the human heart and the needs that we have. When you're hurting, isn't one of the greatest helps to you to know that somebody else cares? cares enough to call, cares enough to come by and see you, cares enough to ask, hey, how are you doing? And maybe that at times requires us to invest a little bit of money to do it. Is it really so important that you hang on to that $10 that you couldn't take them to lunch and just give them an hour of your time? Yet we so often get so hung up on, well, if I do this, then I'm not going to be able to do this other thing I wanted to do. The more willing we are to give our wealth to help others, the greater the return in their life and even in our own. And then the last value or principle that I want us to see from Paul's life is that we have to develop the heart of a giver. Paul quoted Jesus in driving home the most important principle for avoiding materialism in verse 35. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And we understand that principle to some degree. You know, we're at Christmas time. You get to a place, I hope anyway, where it's more fun to watch people receive what you want to give them than it is to even get anything for yourself. My wife gets frustrated at me because almost every birthday, anniversary, Christmas, or whatever, I say, don't buy me anything. I don't need anything. She says, but I want to get you something. I said, well, that's your problem. I mean, you got to deal with that. But we enjoy being able to express our love to somebody, to selflessly give. And so we understand that to a degree. The question is, are we able to broaden it out from there? Why do we never seem to move from that point to where we use the same thinking in every relationship or corner of our lives? Stop and think about the ministry and the example of Jesus. He gave his time to the little children that nobody else gave time to. He gave his love to those who were the outcast in society. He gave his instruction to those who were confused and misguided. He gave healing to those who were sick and hurting. He gave his patience to those who were struggling. He gave his friendship to those who were lonely and cast aside. But ultimately, he gave his life for the world. That's what Jesus did. That's the picture that he painted. And so when Paul is quoting this principle, it's more blessed to give than receive. Jesus lived that way. Paul was seeking to follow the example that Jesus has set and to encourage us and to teach us to do the same thing. That it's not enough for us to just say all the right things. It has to show up in how we order our lives. Simply put, the single best way to escape materialism is to become a great giver. You want to get over it? Learn how to give. And to do it for the joy of knowing that God's going to use it in somebody's life, in somebody else's situation. God blesses far beyond what you give, what I give, in ways that we can never imagine. Well, as I think back over my life and ministry at all of the people who have been a blessing to me and to my family, that they've done things that I never would have even thought about. And yet God just said, I want you to do this for them. I mean, I could begin to name names, and I won't do it, but of people who, they've done things, and they don't even realize the full impact of it, of how God used that in my family's life. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell my wife. I'm not asking for anything from you, okay? So that don't misunderstand what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are people that God puts a burden on your heart about. And when He does, are you willing to say, yes, God, here it is. I'll do it. Not just writing them a check or handing them a $100 bill or anything like that, but to seriously pray through and think through, what can I do to give what they need most, to meet that greatest need that they have. In fact, I would challenge you this time of year to really not, listen, I'm all for being great and giving to charities and all that. I'm not against any of that. If you do it, thank you. I know it's going to bless a lot of people. But my passion and my burden is to really pray through the people that God brings across my path. What is their greatest need, and how can God use me, excuse me, to help meet that need? What is it that God has entrusted to me that I'm in a position to provide for someone else? Because only when we begin to view it that way do we escape this trap of materialism. See, the ultimate key that Paul is teaching us here to escaping from it is to pattern our lives after Jesus. And again, I just want to stop and ask you to imagine the difference in your home this Christmas if we said, God, we've never tried this before, but we're going to put these values and principles into play. We're going to do it differently. Imagine if it's not Christmas time. The new year rolls around, you're creating a budget or whatever you do to get ready for it, and you said, God, this year, I want to live differently. I want my focus to be different. I want my purpose to be clear. And I want to go about the work of investing in others, developing the heart of a giver, not just so I can get the warm fuzzies from having helped somebody else, but so that I can be like you. See, that's really the heart of it. I want to be like Jesus. And there's no way we can ever give to the extent that He did. But we can follow His example. Willing to give whatever we have, wherever we can, for the glory of God. Is it a challenge? Yes. Is it going to require us to look differently from the world? Absolutely. But God will bless it, and God will honor it, and God will multiply it far beyond what our limited understanding can comprehend. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads with me, and as we come before the Lord right now, and as we take these principles to heart and begin to reflect on them and allow God through His Spirit to speak to us through them.